Hello, everyone. This is Raphael.
And I'm Loryn.
We're the Pacheco siblings, and welcome to the Hypercube podcast, a talk show in which two siblings converse about anything and everything. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good myself. Still kind of riding the high. We just got through a couple days ago doing Beyond the Veil, the second part of your little Alien 2 shot. Oh my goodness, it's so good. Highly recommend everybody to check it out. Definitely one of my best experiences as a player character, which granted is a very very short list.
That's true. That is very small, very short
list, but definitely I think one of my favorite ones. I think that might be your TTRPG masterpiece for the time being.
Do you think so? Yeah. You know what? I have realized I have an ethos, I guess, of GMing.
Yeah.
Where I think like what I aspire to give a player when I GM is an experience. Like it doesn't have I'm not too worried about things like the mechanics or things like providing like a true to the rule book experience for a TTRPG. That's just a set of guidelines for me to kind of deliver this experience to people, right? And I was like, yeah, for this one, I 100% was just like I was honed in on this very particular experience for this story.
Yeah, for sure. If anything, that it was an experience. Which, to be fair, yeah, I think that's what made it so great, because I feel like this was the most you thing you've ever done as a campaign or as a role-playing game format. And it's it definitely I feel like it has a lot of what I expect out of your voice in it. And yeah, it's it's so good. It's so good. So recommend everybody check that out. By the time you're listening to this, the VOD will either be out or soon be out. So it's
right.
Yeah, for sure. Check that out. Or at least the VOD for the second part. The first part's already up. But yeah, so that's really exciting. Lots of things been kind of exciting lately, but yeah.
Indeed.
In life in general. So things are crazy.
A lot of stuff going on. We're getting pulled every which way.
But today, speaking of crazy, we were having a conversation before we started rolling about cults, and we kind of want to continue that conversation here, because that is a topic we've been wanting to address on the podcast. Cults.
Something we want to address. Yeah, this is a discussion that I definitely at least have a whole lot to say about.
Very strong opinions about cults, which is interesting. I feel kind of timely, because we're in a bit of a how should you say, like cults are in vogue right now, you know, they're kind of trending.
It's a new hot thing. For
sure. Like, do you have any idea how many cult documentaries Netflix produces in a given month? Right? Like, it's a very popular subject matter, clearly, at the moment. Well, there's a market for this stuff.
It's the next evolution of the true crime documentary.
I think it is, honestly. I think we went through the true crime documentary phase, and I think now we're in a true cult documentary phase, where people are like eating this stuff up. But it's something, it's weird, because I don't think either of us have engaged with like the cult documentaries very much, but it's still something that we have
not as much. Yeah.
Very strong opinions about. And in your case, maybe, I guess, life experience that is a bit more present than documentaries.
Yes. I mean, I've watched a few documentaries, but none of the big produced ones, just like some stuff on YouTube of just like weird occurrences going on. But absolutely, I find this weird, strange kind of comfort hearing the experiences of like leaders within the cult. Like, obviously, it's tragic when you have all these victims who are taken advantage of. But then, like, you hear the stories, like the people who are like the kind of like these leaders, like these figureheads, and it's usually this strange kind of comfort, or it's just like, it was like this person so divorced from reality that they think something that is inherently like just untrue, like they are better than everybody else, right? Like that's just not true. But there's a strange kind of comfort where it's like almost anybody is like just one bad day / an entire traumatic childhood away from thinking that they're better than everybody else and starting a cult.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely.
But there's a certain personality type that I think is kind of a prerequisite as well.
I'm not too confident that
really
that is as big of a factor. Obviously, someone like me who has the kind of like personality developmental, no, just the personality archetype that I have. I think, yeah, there is a likeliness that it's like, yeah, I might be able to form a cult just by accident, or rather, I might be able to form a cult on purpose. But I think a lot of people are more prone to forming a cult by accident than they're aware of.
Really?
Because I think, absolutely. I genuinely think cults are more prevalent than we think, because the only ones we see are like these really dangerous ones. They're the ones that get like the press, the ones like that are like actively preying and like draining people financially, but actively preying on like on the vulnerable and sometimes doing real physical psychological damage, right? Those are the ones that we see. But my definition of cult extends beyond just, somebody trying to make money off of a very vulnerable group of people. I think people are capable of accidentally creating cults. And I think that's more likely than most people realize.
Okay. So elaborate on that.
So first of all, yeah, you were saying it before. I have experiences, at least what I would consider an experience of being in a cult. A very strange cult. It is the cult of holistic health, which is not one that you might consider like, oh, you know what? That's one of those big ones, those big cults. Like you have your Scientology and you have all of your. That's the immediately next one that came to mind was CrossFit, but I'll get into why CrossFit is a cult later. But yeah, the cult of holistic health. It's like massage therapy and herb, like what do you call it? Herbology and Reiki. Do you know what Reiki is?
I've heard of it.
Reiki is massage if you're a germaphobe. You literally massage a person without directly touching their body. What you're massaging and you're physically interacting with is their energy field and the aura around them. So you go into a Reiki practitioner's office. Yeah, you physically interact with their vibes. You go into a Reiki practitioner's office and you sit there, half an hour go by and they tell you to flip over. And then half an hour will go by and they'll tell you, thank you, you can leave. And that's it. And if you watch what they're doing like all this like crazy mystic looking, just like, like Qigong just right above you, just in the air above you. And they're like, what are you doing? It's like
doing Qigong forms.
Yeah. It's like, what are you doing? It's like, I'm doing Tai Chi. No, the belief there is that they're interacting with your energies and that's going to create healing inside of your body. Literally no documentation that is even remotely possible. So fantastic bit of like,
or at least no scientific documentation, because I'm sure there's plenty of documentation.
That's true.
I'm sure plenty of ink has been spilled over it.
Absolutely. And the thing is, like, that's the case in most all of these kind of holistic health fields. You take acupuncture, you take massage therapy, you take chiropractic, you take the other big one is, there's like reflexology. It's kind of part of massage therapy, but there's another big one, which is, I forget. Either way, all of the kind of like the benefits, there are actual physical benefits. Like when you actually get into the palpative medicine, like, what massage does is it's passive stretching. It's, active stretching is you getting up, touching your toes. Passive stretching is somebody pressing your muscles and elongating them that way. So yeah, there's health benefits that way, but it's like, it's not going to like cure your cold. It's not going to boost your immune system. It's not going to do all this stuff that they claim that it can do. Like it increases your blood flow, increases all this stuff. And it's like, what it does is it makes people feel good. And when people feel good, their immune system is boosted. The massage didn't do that. A feeling of being, like taken care of. And this feeling of just like, taking care of yourself and being in an environment that is nice and calming. That's what's boosting your immune system. You can do that in the safety of your own home with a good movie and a spa, just running a hot bath. You can get the exact same benefits of a massage. It's not the massage; it's a feeling of being taken care of and taking care of yourself. And that's what that's kind of like what this entire field is based off of. And they develop these weird, these weird rituals that they do, which they claim make the effects better, like, right, going into a massage place, and they do those, they have like their routines that they do. It's like, and this is going to help you, I don't know, have a better sex life or something. But there's no documented evidence of any of that. And they're medicine adjacent, right? That's why it's called alternative medicine. Because, like,
right, it's
not real medicine. The real medicine helps people.
Like alternative facts.
Like alternative facts. Okay, I said in a previous episode that there's no such thing as a binary, and binaries are forced and unnatural. But all of culture is unnatural, and this is a binary. Right. There is either medicine or not medicine. That's not technically true either. Things can help without being, like, you know, medicinal, obviously. But the placebo effect is a very real effect. And yeah, so you have all these, like, organizations and institutions that are built on the placebo effect and are built on making people feel good about themselves, and then they go on to then make their lives better, and then they take all the credit for it.
Right.
Oh, right. And the punchline is, I went to a school
I was trying to get us there.
I went to a school for massage therapy. I've completely forgot about talking about the fact that I was I am technically trained in massage therapy and yoga instruction and herbology and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, because I don't think that's common knowledge, so I wanted to get us there for the audience's sake. And so
completely forgot that was where I needed to start. I was like, let's just talk about massage therapy. So Southern California, went to a school that is no longer around, where I studied massage therapy and yoga instruction and would have gotten a degree in holistic health practitioning. I would have been a holistic health practitioner. I would have gotten a, not a degree, it's a certificate.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess you don't talk about that too often. So talk about that a bit. What happened?
The institution of holistic health. Oh, boy. So first of all, here's how you get into it.
Now we're becoming that Netflix. Now we're in a Netflix documentary territory. It's just like how to join a cult. Step 1.
Imagine you're in high school and okay, so imagine you're in high school and you're in a group home for foster children.
Great backstory.
And one of your clinicians is just the whitest woman. Who's just, I have no idea how to explain. She's that person who is just so pale white you worry for her when she goes out into the sun, and she's constantly wearing sunglasses and a hat, right? And
so like physically the whitest person.
Oh no, like pale, like paper white.
Not like Valley Girl, but like
no, I'm getting there. Also that. Yeah, an infrared absorber. But also culturally the whitest person. This is like somebody who is in Southern California and has bought into that hippie movement, that new wave spiritualism. They go to yoga every week, and they talk about how just like, it's like, oh, you just gotta, be in the right mindset, and like things will just start to, work themselves out for you. It's like, well, hold on, you're talking to people who are literally born addicted to substances.
Right.
Like it's not as easy as that woman. You can't what's the word? It's The Secret. It's called
The Secret. Yeah.
It's
the positive, put out positive vibes into the world.
Positive thinking.
Universe,
The
universe will reverberate in your frequency.
Yeah. What is that called? It's like you manifest your
manifest
success or whatever.
It's something
to that kind of stuff. I don't know something to that effect. Term. Yeah, that kind of stuff, right? Where she's just like full on new age spiritualism, bought into the hippie stuff, and this physically fit individual who is in high school, and somebody who is interested in anatomy, and someone who is interested in kinesiology and sports, and the science of movement and stuff like that. They go, you know what? You really know what you're talking about when it comes to like human bodies and all this other stuff. And like, you really have this kind of like, this is passion you have. Have you considered doing something like massage therapy? It's like, what? Where did that come from? You should do massage therapy. It's like, okay, fine. I'll consider it. I mean, like I've given massages to people, and people say that like I'm good at it because I understand how muscle groups work, and I understand like how you work out for long enough and it's just like, oh yeah, you get sore, you press on it, it feels good. So that was the extent of my massage therapy knowledge at that point, which is like, you know what, you're good at that. You should go to school for it. It's like, okay, fine. And as their clinician, she gets you to get you all the processes that you need to do to get into the college when you get out of high school. So then next thing you know, you're going to college for massage therapy. It's like, okay, well, how did I get here? Like that is something that I'm genuinely struggling with now, because I never really like wanted to do that. Like,
you just ended up there.
That wasn't really like my decision. I ended up there because I needed to do something going out of high school, right? So I was like, okay, I guess go to college. I do like massage therapy. Or I do like giving people massages. I do like interacting with the human body in that way. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I think if I continue on this route, I'll be a sports scientist, a kinesiologist, right? I'll be that person who's just like big and buff in a lab coat, putting, those like electro markers on athletes and watch them run, and watch them run on a treadmill and go, yeah, so you were like 15% more efficient that time. That was my end goal, was to be that guy. So you go to college and you sign up for massage therapy and yoga instruction. Now all these classes is, first of all, anybody can do a massage. Literally anybody. See you sitting in your seat right now. You can massage yourself. You can massage your partner. You can massage your freaking dog. You can massage your cat. I'm sure you do it. It's called petting. It's really good. All you have to do is just put your hand on them and just kind of like rub in a like kind of circular fashion with your palm. That's a massage.
I'm massaging myself right now.
Yeah, like, it's like, oh, my shoulder's feeling a bit sore. It's kind of like press on it. It's like, ooh, it feels pretty good. That's a massage. Mm-hmm. The entire school, like I was in school for 1 year and I did an accelerated program. So it was 2 years of classes in 1 year. So that included massage and yoga, as well as traditional Chinese medicine, herbology, and everything else was technical courses like anatomy and diseases and stuff like that. So you do not need a year to teach somebody how to give somebody a massage. So what do you pad out the rest of that year with?
Well, theory.
And this is where the cultness comes in. It's all theory, right? It's the theory behind massage. Like, why are you giving somebody a massage? To make them feel good? There you go. That's the end of the class. Everybody go home. You're done. It's like, well, yeah, but like, what is the mechanism behind that? It's like, well, it turns out everybody has like these energies, right? And that's where it starts to go off the rails. You start talking about chakras. You start talking about, especially when you go into yoga, because yoga is inherently religious. It is a religious practice. That's not something that people talk about because they want to pull you into this freaking cult, the cult of yoga. It's an inherently religious practice. It was developed by the Vedic cultures in India like 3,000 years ago or something, when Chinese culture and Indian culture, they both had independent like movement practices built into their religion and built into their culture. And so you have all this like inherently religious stuff about the origin of like human emotion and the origin of disease and like deficient personality traits being like, pools of negative energy in the body, and you can work that out through their muscles, and it just starts getting really weird really quickly. But you kind of like agree with it because it's like, it makes sense, right? It makes sense when they talk about it.
There's a system of thought behind it.
There's a system of thought, and it makes sense because intuitively, and this is where they get you, intuitively, they are correct. They are not literally, scientifically, observably correct, but they are intuitively correct. There was something that I've always held on to that has been in the back of my mind. Anytime I get like this kind of like scratchy throat or kind of like a weird kind of like stuffy whatever, is this thing that they said, and I don't remember which culture this comes from, but there's this idea, it might have been traditional Chinese medicine. There's this idea that a scratchy throat or like a sore throat or like a stuffed up throat, like you have phlegm in your throat, it is because, get this, there is a truth that you are holding back, or there is a lie that you have told and you regret it. So in order to get rid of this scratchy throat, in order to get rid of it, the actual prescription is to confess. That's part of like this, the holistic aspect of it, right? It's not just, okay, you have a scratchy throat, let me give you a throat lozenge. It's Why do you have a scratchy throat though? How did this manifest? Well, your throat is your like there are chakras and there are lines of energy associated throughout the body, and your throat obviously is responsible for speech. It's responsible for your truth. It's how you get yourself out there into the world and how you get your ideas out. And something has blocked that energy. That energy path is physically being blocked. That is why your throat is sore. In order for you to unblock that pathway, and in order for you to feel better, you have to clear that negative energy, that lie that you put out into the world, that truth that you are not saying. You have to clear that up, and your throat will feel better. And so you know what happens? You confess whatever it is, your cold goes away, and then you feel better, and you go, whoa, that worked like a charm. Because obviously, like if you've been told that, and that's just the culture, and you're just like, you know what, like I got to do it. Eventually, your sore throat's going to go away. It's not going to stay there forever. Obviously, like it's going to go away, and it's just going to like fix itself because your body's good at fixing itself. But these stories have been told, and it's baked into the kind of culture where, in order to fix like these things, you have to do this other metaphysical ritual, and that ritual is what's responsible for making you feel better. And so they have these connections. It becomes ingrained.
Self-fulfilling prophecy too. There's a word for this kind of logical fallacy, which is which it's not always inherently fallacious, but ad hoc ergo propter hoc, of like this happened, therefore that caused it.
Causal relationships versus correlated. It's causal versus correlated events, right? Yeah, sure. Correlated events. You got a sore throat. You spoke your truth. Sore throat went away. Not causal. Right. Causal was probably some kind of, or it might not even been an infection. You could have just woke up with a sore throat. You could have just woke up with a dry throat that morning. It happens. You never wake up kind of stuffy and it just goes away for the rest of the day. It doesn't mean you're lying. But it makes intuitive sense. You speak your truth, you get rid of that block, and it's like, you know, like you kind of use like these metaphors, these like very flowery language around all these explainable events, but they have their history in thousands of years of people making stuff up to try to get at the core of medicine and seeing what works. And you have all these correlated events, right? Like you have to say, you know what? I had a friend who had a sore throat. They spoke their truth. They started to feel better. What if we did that? You know what? Hey, I think it works. Also, completely unrelated, and it probably has nothing to do with this, but if you just wait it out, it also works. And that's, they have these entire institutions created around these ideas. The worst part is these cults. This is why I would consider these cults, and maybe some others would not, is because they're not malicious. They genuinely kind of want to help people, right? They're created in the same vein as like old, well, it is medicine. It's just relics of medicine. It's a vestigial medicine. This was what people used to do back before we had the scientific method, before we had good like chemistry, and this, like all this stuff, like it was just people just trying to figure out the best way to feel better and the best way to kind of improve the lives of themselves and the people around them. You get stuff where, like, you look at like a lot of native cultures and they have all these rituals because they know the land around them, and they'll say like, oh yeah, if you have a aching bone, or if you have this kind of thing, like you chew on this root and that'll make you feel better. And it's like, oh wow, I'm gonna chew on this root, make you feel better, make it feel better. And you have like these Western kind of scientific minded people come in and they go like, wow, that's obviously chewing on a root's not going to make you feel better. It must be some kind of like it's the ritual of it that's making them feel better, right? Like it's there's nothing about that that's really making them physically better. The ritual of it, it's the placebo effect. And then you get, then later on down the line, those same people who develop the ability to like synthesize chemicals and be able to actually like break down what it is about our bodies that makes pain and painkillers work. And then you realize like, oh, but those native cultures, when they're chewing on that root, they were actually physically feeling better. It turns out there's a chemical compound in that is like numbing the pain. Like in Native American cultures, I think in the West Coast, there's a willow tree. You chew on the willow bark, it's aspirin. There's natural aspirin in the willow bark. That's what the drug that became aspirin was synthesized from, or like that was I think it was synthesized from. It was the same stuff that's in the bark of the willow tree. And like, yeah, like it works. but they don't know why it works, right? And so you have these things that both are actually physically medicine. You have the bark of the willow tree combined with things that are not actually physically medicine. And it's all muddied together, which is why it's really hard to parse what is fact and what is fiction. And that's how a lot of people get sucked into these cults, these ideas of thinking, because it's like they genuinely do want to help people. They genuinely do have your best interest in mind for the most part. We'll get into when that goes awry later. For the most part, they have your best interest in mind. They really, really just want you to feel better. They just don't. They either don't know any better, or they just are continuing a tradition that has lasted thousands of years, that has just survived due to either sheer luck or the fact that there is actual aspects of truth within it.
Yeah. So I guess that's where things get a little bit, I don't know if I would say complicated, because it's just like you said, there are elements of truth in there. And then that gets into the whole conversation we could have about like truth versus fact, right? Because like that, and this kind of gets into some of the worldview conversations we had before, especially in like the myth of the binary episode, right? It's just like there's a certain amount of this stuff, right, where it's just like you said, there's religious roots in a lot of those teachings, and like the religious aspects of those are actually helpful to a lot of people, right? Like the narrative behind why those systems work is kind of more important than the systems themselves to a lot of people. And but in the case that you went to, it's just particularly bizarre because it's removed from the religious elements, even though the religious elements are all in there. It's not like everybody that,
I didn't go to India.
You didn't go to India. The people at that school weren't actually like Hindu practitioners. They weren't necessarily like priests. They were teaching this as if it was medicine.
They weren't like Buddhist monks living in the mountains of Tibet and just saying like, you gotta focus on the teachings of the Buddha, and you have to follow the 8-step process. Where the 8-step process, by the way, is I think it's Ashtanga, the Ashtanga process, which is a Vedic step to enlightenment, right? Like there's 8 steps to enlightenment. Mm-hmm. Yoga's, I think, like the 3rd or the 4th one. So we're going to do that. We're going to go to the first step. We're going to go to the second step. We're going to go to the 3rd step. We're going to get to yoga. And this is where we're going to make all your money. And then you're going to get to your 5th step. And then you're like, they didn't do that. No, they skipped straight to the 4th step and just like, or they skipped straight to yoga and said, this is the culture. And this is what we're going to teach you. And completely removed from its original like purpose, because it does have real physical like benefits to stretching. Like stretching is really good for you. It's exercise. And so that's why the Western world kind of latched onto it, and they developed all these institutions to teach these things as if it was like real proper medicine, when in reality it's not just that. It's the culture behind it. That's like it's not just the fact that there are that they work or they don't work. It's the culture behind it, whether is what makes it like, a cult. Actually, right. I made this mistake before where I keep forgetting to actually define my terms in these episodes.
Yes, so please define your terms, because define how you consider cults, because you haven't really gotten properly into why you consider this a cult.
So a cult is any idea, individual, or let's say ritual that takes over your fundamental identity. Who you are as a person is replaced with this idea, individual, this idea, this person, or this ritual. So when you just kind of, I guess, casually, you go to yoga casually. It's like, oh yeah, it's a nice thing to do with some friends on the weekend, kind of get a good stretch in. That's fine. You're not interacting with the cult side of it. When you are getting into the side of like, I'm going to pick on hot yoga for a little bit, because hot yoga is a fascinating cult, and that's a cult proper. And that is a cult of personality proper. The guy who invented hot yoga is literally a scam artist. So oh my God, that's a story in and of itself. But let's say hot yoga. So hot yoga is the same thing as yoga, except for it's done basically like in a sauna. Like the entire room, like the thermostat is cranked up so you're sweating, and instead of smoothly so there's different kinds of yoga. Vinyasa yoga is what most people practice. That is going from one pose to another smoothly, 3 or 4 breaths between each pose. That's vinyasa yoga. Hot yoga is 3 or 4 minutes between each pose. You hold this pose until you are aching and you just can't anymore. And that's part of it. It's literally he's the person who invented this. He invented this style of yoga to physically and mentally break people down. No joke. And he created this so that he can profit because I think he was some Indian guru who came to the West and realized he can make a ton of money off yoga,
right?
And off of vulnerable white people.
I've heard of this guy. I don't know his name, but I'm pretty sure Netflix actually has done a documentary about this one, a cult documentary about this guy.
Dude's fascinating, man. He tried to trademark, or I think he tried to trademark or patent his yoga routine. And it's bro, you can't do that. It's that's literally not possible. That's not allowed. And completely focused on money. He actually does not have your best interest in mind. But he developed this, and he developed this to break people down. He has a extremely uninviting environment to do this thing in, and then he'll come into that environment and he'll say I am going to I'm going to break you down, and I'm gonna build you back up into a better person, right? By doing hot yoga, you are going to be a better human being. You're gonna be a better husband. You're gonna be a better wife. You're gonna be a better lover, and he will talk about how every pose, and he's not doing these poses himself, mind you. He will talk about these poses that you're doing and the benefits that they have, so that while you are sitting there for 4 to 5 minutes, just absolutely aching while you're standing on one leg for 45 minutes. Standing up for 45 minutes is a chore for some people. Standing on one leg, holding a pose while the thermostat is 105 degrees, you're not in a good headspace. And then he'll come in and say this is required. This is a sacrifice you must make, because this pose is going to save your sex life. And it's what the heck, man? Oh, and then he'll go around and start touching all the pretty people in his class. That's a separate thing. But dude, there are so many weird people in yoga where they get into it simply because they know that a lot of very fit athletic young women will go to their class and they'll say, "Oh, come on, let me just adjust you here really quick. Here, let me just move your leg just this way, and let me just adjust you this." And they're literally just feeling you up the whole time, and it's very creepy. Yeah. So the culture behind it, right? The culture behind it, that's what makes it a cult. If you're just going in casually, you're not part of the cult culture. But if you're there and you're this is my thing. I am a hot yoga practitioner. I do this because it's going to make me a better person. And it replaces who you are. And you go around to all your friends and you say, "Are you doing hot yoga?" Because if you're not, you need to be. That's when it starts becoming a cult. That is when you get the vulnerable drawn into it.
Yeah, and I guess under your definition, there's a lot of things that can qualify as a cult that we don't normally think of as a cult.
So many things.
And we were talking in the context before we started recording of the crypto bro culture. And I was I pointed out the fact
the culture.
The culture the culture is a fascinating aspect of that, because I'd watched that that video essay you'd sent me a long time ago on from Folding Ideas on NFTs and the problem with cryptocurrency. Line goes up, and and it was just fascinating to learn, because I hadn't before that encountered too much of that culture. It just hadn't been on my radar, and I've seen it now that I know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's everywhere, right?
It's in a lot of places, but it's a fascinating culture, and one that definitely is, as has rightfully been pointing out, that it's definitely a bit of a scam hierarchy, but it's the people that are targeted by it, right, are people that are vulnerable to that scam, just psychologically, but also that are kind of primed to be able to buy into the idea that this is just a meaningful part of their life, right? It becomes a whole aspect of their identity, and they become invested in propagating it and defending it ideologically, right?
Yeah, because it crosses that line between this is good for you and rather there's a logical leap that you have to make where something goes from being good for you to if you are not doing this, then it is bad for you.
Well, yeah, not only it goes from being good for you to being the greater good, right?
Exactly.
And when something is the greater good, then you have to get other people on board for it if you want a better society.
Because then you have a moral responsibility.
Yeah, you have a
moral responsibility to get as many people in there as you can.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you? You know, like if you see the train coming towards someone, because then like you're doing a service in that act.
You're helping everybody.
Yeah. And so run with that definition by me one more time. Let me stew in that again for your personal
definition that I use. The definition I use of a cult, because there's a lot of different definitions of cults and different kinds of cults. Obviously, like one of the more popular ones, the cult of personality. One of the requirements is that there is a singular figure, like there's a singular charismatic leader at the head of it. And in the hot yoga case, there actually is a singular charismatic leader at the head of it. And it's just some like sweaty Indian guy, but
specifically sweaty, constantly in hot rooms.
It's just, oh man, I've never been in a hot yoga class. I do not want to know what one of those rooms smells like after a class, dude.
Fair.
Oh my goodness. Like, how do you rent out a room? Just decide to like, hey, we're gonna do this thing in the studio for like an hour. It's like, oh yeah, cool, sure. Just make sure I'll clean up afterwards. And then you come in afterwards and it smells like feet and butt. Anyways, so you have the cult of personality aspect of it, which requires a singular charismatic leader, which I don't think is a necessary feature of all cults. That is a cult of personality. But you remove the of personality, then you just have cults. And there's a lot of definitions that have a lot of like key features, right? One of them being you can't leave easily. There is a repercussion to leaving, right? Once you're in, you can't get out. And that is a very important aspect. But I think those are all symptoms of the main feature of a cult, which is that becoming a part of a cult is any cult is something that replaces your fundamental personality with that thing, with that person, concept, or ritual. That is my definition of a cult, because then everything else stems from that. If you replace your who you are as a person with this idea, there is going to be some kind of backlash for stepping out of it. You have like an investment, personal investment to stay in, and people around you will remind you that like, hey, what you are doing is, like I said, it's for the greater good. If you stop doing this, you are actively doing harm.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then obviously, if you are actively doing harm, sometimes that requires consequences. That requires punishment.
Mm-hmm. So if I can just process this a little bit. So under that definition, like you would consider the school you went to be a cult, right? Because it was this like ideological environment that had all of those attributes, and that was like an identity. Like people identified by that practice that you were learning there. That was
the cult of holistic health. Yeah.
Right. There's a whole
the school itself, like obviously I went to a cult college, and not in that the college itself was a cult, but that it brought people into the cult of holistic health. The holistic health is the whole thing above it, right? That is your I think I remember what the word I was going to say was now. It's homeopathy. That's what I was going to say. Homeopathy, literally a scam. And I have met people who are in my classes who have fully bought in to the homeopathic holistic lifestyle. There's this this really tiny, cute little girl who was in our class. Well, I say girl, she had like 3 kids, but she was tiny. That's the point. And fully bought into homeopathy. Like she uses homeopathic remedies for all of her children's sicknesses, which meant she did not vaccinate her kids. And also as an explanation for what homeopathy is a practice of creating medicine by distilling. Well, what they believe is that like fixes like. So like if you have, I don't know, like sepsis or something like that, which is like an infection of like your blood or whatever, in order to fix that, you need to consume an infection or like some kind of pathogen. So what they'll do is they'll take a thing like, I don't even know. Let's just go on the safe side, and let's just say they'll take like aspirin, right? So like, hey, we have this aspirin, but like the spirit of the aspirin, it's the essence of the aspirin that is what we want. We don't need any of this actual chemical stuff. So we're going to dissolve this aspirin, this one pill, into 100 gallons of water. We dissolve it completely, turn it into a solution of aspirin and water. We're going to distill that, or we're going to take 1 drop of that and put that into another 100 gallons of water. So now it has been diluted, 1 part per whatever. And then we're going to take 1 drop from that, put it into another 100 gallons of water. And we're going to continue to do that until no remaining molecules of that original aspirin are left. But the spirit of that aspirin is still around. And then they literally sell you water.
Oh.
That's homeopathy.
Water.
It's literally water, but it has the spirit of medicine. And because the FDA doesn't regulate supplements, all they have to do is say, this is a supplemental medicine, or it is a supplemental treatment. They never put medicine. They never say like cure. They never say anything like that. They can't put that on their packaging, but they can say this is like a supplemental treatment of headaches, of the flu, of polio or whatever. And they can do literally anything they want. They don't even have to put any actual real like aspirin into the first vial of 100 grams of water. They can just literally sell you bottles of water and say that it has a spirit of aspirin in it. It has a spirit of a polio vaccine in it. And people buy that stuff up because they really want to believe that that they want to help their children, but they also don't believe that, big pharma has what's best in mind for them. So, they have this kind of push and pull where they don't trust huge organizations to help them. So they turn to these smaller organizations who then put on the face of, we're going to help you, right? This is medicine that is safe. There is no side effects to any of this. We are not going to harm you, because they're not selling you anything. They're not selling you any medicine. There's nothing in there. So yeah, it's like fully bought into that. And she was there because she wanted to be I think she already had like a kind of like home practice, and she wanted to add like massage therapy as one of like her services. So that's why she was in the class, and that's what they were teaching. And like nobody challenged her on that. Nobody said like, homeopathy is fake. I didn't challenge her because I didn't know what it was at the time. She was talking about homeopathy as just like like this part of alternative medicine, this part of holistic health. And I was like, oh, we're in a college of holistic health. Oh, that must be something like this then. You massage somebody and they feel better. Okay, I get it. Yeah, go on as you are. I never challenged it because I just never thought to look it up.
Right. Yeah. So hold on, before I get too far from my processing here, let me continue, because you bring up some interesting points there too that kind of gets to where my brain is going, at least from my point of view. So yeah, and you kind of bring in like these social dynamics that are at play in cult cultures. And because it's interesting that we start with, right, like the whole massage therapy, holistic health, that whole culture and that whole dynamic, right, which, as you point out, is inherently religious. And it's been kind of removed from its religious and cultural context, right, in order to just be this kind of
very, very much removed.
Yeah, adopted into this like westernized, institutionalized process to kind of produce more of that culture. And it's kind of fascinating because there's a lot, I guess we can talk a lot about identity and in general, right? Because it's not necessarily a bad thing to have something that gives you a sense of purpose and defines your identity, right? To have an external cause that is like beyond yourself. And I guess that's what I'm kind of interested in finding the nuance here is, right? Because basically what you're describing is, and there is an extent that perhaps you haven't factored into your definition of cult yet, that I think is just kind of assumed, right? There's this assumption that cults are religious, right? That seems to be a base level that everyone kind of agrees on. And what you're describing is basically like religious social dynamics at play, right?
So
like this
here's the thing. Yeah.
Well, hold on. This, like this kind of self-enforcing, right, dynamic, this community dynamic, right, where it provides you with a community of people who are like recognizably your people and who you do life with, and who share your worldview and can help inform and develop that. But also there's like those kind of, I guess, darker elements that kind of loom in that sort of dynamic where, like you point out, you get this sort of peer pressure thing, right? And this ideology of saying like, okay, what we're doing is for the greater good, right? And therefore we have a moral obligation to propagate it. And if you apostatize, so to speak, right, to put it in religious terms from that, then you are actively doing harm, and that requires correction. So there's, right, like all of those are like basically religious dynamics at play. And yeah, I guess I'm just kind of reflecting on that, right? And where these lines are drawn between cult and religion, because like
my main factor of what makes a cult is the same thing of what makes a religion. And the differences are like, yeah, in the nuance, because what I genuinely think many religions are in fact cults. They're just too big to be called a cult anymore, and they've just been so ingrained in the culture that we're just like, yeah, that's a religion. But it's like, nah, it's a cult. Something like Scientology, right? That's the one you can point to and obviously say it's like, that is technically considered a religion by like the U.S. Census and organizations around the world. Like that is a religion that people can practice, but like that's straight up a cult. Like there's nothing about that good
old fashioned personality
cult.
Right? Yeah. Like it's good old fashioned,
like a singular individual. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those religions that is straight up a cult. And I think a lot of religions right now are straight up cults. We just culturally kind of moved them over into the religion category. So for me,
once they generate a certain mass,
once they generate enough momentum, really.
Yeah.
What differentiates a cult from a religion for me is the intention. I guess what it all comes down to. Something what makes it a cult is that somebody decided that this was it comes down to being profitable. It makes them money, right? Yoga is extremely profitable. Where yoga comes from was this whole big boom in the 60s and 70s, this hippie movement, right? Where suddenly Eastern mysticism was the big thing, right? You had this new age, new wave spirituality. You have Eastern mysticism meets Western science, I guess. And so it's like, wow, these Eastern mystics, these gurus, they know something that we don't, but we can measure what they can't. So if we combine those two things and like we look at their religious practice and we take out all the things that we cannot measure, which is literally all the spiritualism, and what you're left with, at least in the yoga sense, is like the physical practice. That's what makes it a cult, is that nobody genuinely thought that bringing yoga to white people was going to make them better Buddhists.
Right. Yeah, that wasn't necessarily the design intention there. So yeah, and that's an interesting thing too, where you could kind of nuance and subdivide this even further, which is like, I know that you like still enjoy certain practices and activities that are involved in yoga, right? Because like there are like health benefits to it as an exercise, right? Like, and so it's like all of these things can be like further parsed out and separated. But I guess what we're getting to, I guess, within that definition is like harm is done when things are blown out of proportion to the point of becoming an all-encompassing identity with potentially like abusive social dynamics that enforce it. And that's when like things become problematic and cult-like.
And the thing is, the line between cult and religion can very easily get blurred. You can have an actual proper like religion that is not at its core a cult. It can turn into a cult when the wrong set of circumstances kind of appear, right? You can take the fundamental framework of a religion and use that to create a cult for yourself. And that has happened a ton. Like there's this one particular lady who started a weight loss program, turned it into a cult by adding Christianity to it. It is a fascinating story.
I've heard of this. Yeah.
So it's like you take that framework, right? Like, you know that there are people who are going to devote themselves to it. You add that religious aspect and suddenly it becomes a lifestyle. It's not just losing weight. It's losing weight for God.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very fascinating. I think where you talk about those lines getting blurry, I could kind of, talk about that from a more religious perspective, right? Because there's a lot of established religions where as you said, they could kind of delve into that cult territory just by the practice of them, right? The religion itself isn't a cult per se, but individual, groups or factions within it can become cults within the same
use that
belief
faction,
system, right?
Yeah. And they can use that idea to form a cult.
Like, for example, I guess more recently, there's a pretty hit podcast, the rise and fall of Mars Hill within the evangelical world. And I think that very much kind of marks that, sort of line in just looking at it from an outsider perspective is, this was a church that grew very rapidly and was very, well, it also had traditional cult elements. It was very centered around its lead pastor. And was like the fact that, like, when it comes to church planting, just to kind of get into the religion of it a bit, is the idea there, right, is proper institution building, right? You want to plant something that can outlive you. Right. And so when that pastor kind of had their fall from grace, why did that church die off? Well, it's because that person was the church, right? Like that person was like,
it didn't survive him.
The institution didn't need to die off. But it did because he was the institution, right? It was revolved around him and as a central figurehead, and then like people's identity was on an institution that was upheld by an individual, right? And so that's when it gets into like kind of cult-like activity. And it was specific to his way of life, his way of doing things, his belief of what Christianity should be that, had enough things in common with a lot of other large strains of evangelicalism that it was hard to call it out, but ultimately was turns out a pretty toxic cesspool of an environment that a lot of good things happened which I guess is kind of like the complexities of religious experience in general, right? Like people can have very profound, very good things come out of their activities in a cult environment because things like the kind of social benefits and community that you can get from it can be very like tangibly good for you for a time.
Yeah. Nothing is ever all good or all bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where you get into pretty complex nuances, even when abuse can enter the equation. But still, like there are great things that were happening there as well. But it was an environment that ultimately took on these cult-like qualities and therefore failed and fell apart in the way that a cult ultimately does, right? With the collapse of their figurehead and with it, the entire institution crumbles. And so, these kinds of establishments are within frameworks and religions and worldviews and customs that we wouldn't normally consider cultish, but the practice is.
Exactly. Same thing with like Buddhism, I would say not a cult. But yoga in the West can very much quickly turn into a cult. I have seen people who are very adamant in their yoga practice, right? And they're very what do you call that? Evangelical, right? Mm-hmm. It's the idea that like that practicing yoga, being a part of their yoga studio, like that is like what gives them life. And then there are others who would just be like, I practice once a day. Like with me, I do a sun cell as often as I can. If I have more time, then I'll do a quick like routine. And it's like I have all that information, I have all that knowledge because I went to that school, but I don't use that knowledge to then try to like put this idea out there that yoga is somehow better for you than not doing yoga. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's what's kind of, I guess, defines the difference. Is it's not like I guess under your definition, it's not an all-encompassing part of your identity, and it's not. But and again, that's not to say that everything that is a central core identity marker is inherently a bad thing. But I guess it's just to add another to the Hypercube bingo card. I guess ultimately it's about the moderation, right? And but it's the moderation and I guess the methodology, because I think there's a distinct methodology, and intention behind cult-like activity that is inherently harmful, if not like eventually leads to harmful activity. And so I guess that's also probably going to be on the bingo card for the Hypercube podcast in the long run, is intentionality, because it turns out intentionality
for sure.
Intentionality matters a lot. And
it matters a whole lot for creatures whose entire like existence it kind of revolves around intentionality.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So that's a whole separate conversation. But yeah, and then this extends into all sorts of things. I'm also thinking about, maybe we could kind of append this on here. We don't have time to get into it very deeply, but like on the martial arts level, right?
That's goodness, I didn't even touch that.
Oh yeah, because with martial arts is also something that inherently started out as a spiritual practice, right? And it's kind of fascinating. I'm not sure if you've been seeing like Eric Jacobus's journey of meaning that he's been going down. And he's been doing a series of interviews for his podcast, Action Talks, which has a lot of great information on it. But he's also, that series of interviews is kind of a part of his general journey of meaning that he's going down and trying to define movement language and why people move the way that they do and where that comes from. And he has a great video essay breaking down like the roots of the Hong Kong style. Well, it's a series of video essays where he's supposed to be breaking down the roots of the Hong Kong style. He hasn't done one in a while, but he started first with the foundation of just like Chinese martial arts and where that comes from. And where it comes from is straight up religion, right? And where that, it kind of diving back to those same roots you're talking about to way back in those ancient days. Well, you know, some of that split off and became Kung Fu and became Shaolin animal forms and became, you know, Tai Chi and all of that. And so there's religious roots to all of that and mysticism behind a lot of it. Like there's a whole spiritual system of belief that is associated with these martial arts forms that we get them kind of separated from now. Why? Because they have practical applications outside of that. And so we're like, okay, let's take the technique and leave behind everything else. But the mysticism is part of the movement language that's baked into it as well. There is mythology and narrative that is baked into those movements. But because there's an inherently religious origin to a lot of martial arts practice, there's also a lot of tradition that just kind of gets passed down as like a vestigial limb, kind of like you're talking about with the spiritualism in massage therapy when it's taught as alternative medicine. And that's when you get to eventually distill down to stuff like Aikido, where there's this kind of old school like martial arts mentality, even though it's a very new system of fighting. There's a very old school martial arts mentality that goes into a lot of the culture that you see in Aikido of people being convinced that they're like honor bound to defend the integrity of this martial art that ultimately has been proven to be not very practical.
Nope. Unfortunately not. And and then you get like the weird stuff where there's always going to be like some outliers, right? Like I told you about like Reiki, like that's just out there. And there's a ton of stuff out there. Like that's just very, it's like a convolution of different mystical and spiritual beliefs. And they all kind of like manifest themselves in these very strange ways. Cause you talk about like the cults of like these martial art cults, and then you get stuff like the no touch KOs and like the chi blast martial arts and stuff like that, where
those people are some straight up Dragon Ball stuff.
Yeah. Like you can't be a part of that without having to buy in to some kind of like higher meaning of what you're doing. Because like, if you just take a step back and look at it, like this is very inherently silly. You can't knock somebody out by not touching them. It's not how that works.
Yeah. There's a buy-in, but what you find in all of those, and especially in like the whole Aikido framework, is again that kind of cult-like element of it becomes a part of their identity, right? And that's why they feel honor bound to defend it. Because there is an identity aspect that is drilled into their head within the institutions that teach them that this is something that you have a vested interest in believing works, and that is a superior system of fighting, which is very fascinating because it seems to be present in Aikido in a way that hasn't survived in a lot of other martial arts. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the personalities perhaps of its teachers and founders, and quite frankly, the personality of people who have helped popularize it. not naming any names, but we can only think of one carrot-eating person who has done such a thing.
Some kind of seagull.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's weird, but that is definitely very cult-like in all of the definitions you have presented.
And it borrows the foundation of like thousands of years of tradition, like you were saying. Like it can be new techniques, like new fighting techniques. It can bring in these new things, right? Like Aikido is relatively new, developed, and I don't know if it was developed from whole cloth. I think it actually comes from some other Japanese martial arts.
It has some roots in other Japanese like jujitsu and stuff like that.
But it is a martial art, and martial arts have been around for thousands of years, so it must work.
Yeah. And then you get into like truly wild McDojo stuff, which I really don't know how much cult staying power those have. But
and I think that's something that also needs to be talked about when it comes to talking about cults, is like the difference between a strong cult and a weak cult. There are a lot of weak cults out there that are just
there are a lot of attempts at cults.
There are a lot of cult attempts at culting has been made, where there are people who are just like,
I can make
maybe intentionally. Yeah, like maybe they're intentionally being like, hey, I am aware that what I'm teaching doesn't work, but if I sell it hard enough, I can make a couple $100, right? Or something like where, they're only doing it as a scam. They're just trying to make it work, but they're not good at it. Or they genuinely believe themselves that what they're doing is correct and good or whatever. And then people come in and buy into that and then follow them. Like, there's a ton of like these little weak cults that pop up, and that's why I think like it is extremely easy, I think, for someone to accidentally form a cult.
Yeah.
Although now that I'm thinking about it, as I'm doing this, going through this, I'm realizing I think actually there might be a reason why cult of personality, that singular individual, might be one of the key factors of what makes something a cult. Because now that I'm thinking about it, right, my definition of a cult comes down to like intentionality, comes down to all this other stuff. But like the key main bit, the part that I think is the most important, which is something that takes over your personality, something that takes over your entire being, that doesn't happen on its own. Somebody has to tell you that that's what's important. Because if you just decide this is what I am now, that's just your personality. Like if you just like, hey, my thing is knitting. And knitting is what I do. I'm a knitter, and I'm just gonna make my entire personality revolve around this. And people, hey, you guys, you should start knitting. Like, you just become that weird person who knits. Then it's supposed to, if somebody came in and said, you need to knit, and knitting is gonna save your life, and you need to get as many people in here as you can to start knitting. Then it becomes a cult.
Then it becomes
so I realized
pressurized.
Yeah. So I think actually there's a reason why it has to be not a singular individual figure, but like at least somebody, an external force. Because if it is internal, yeah, it has to be a social element. Because if it is internal, that's just how personalities form.
I guess that's fair. So you're elaborating on your definition as we speak.
I changed it. Yep. You just watched me change my definition of my personal definition of cult, which is just coming back into line of what cult scientists already believe. But
man, we just circled right back around to the mainstream thought.
We got there eventually, but that's the thing.
Check that off your Hypercube bingo card. Somebody changing their mind.
Loryn changes their mind. But yeah, but that's, I think that's more indicative, I think, of my own personality, because I like being wrong, which is I think something more people need to be open to. Being wrong is a fascinating feeling.
Truth masochist.
I might get into why later, because I really would love to talk about my internal philosophy of
learning
how I seek truth.
Yeah. So, yeah. I guess as we close down here, we've gone a bit long because it turns out we had a lot to say about cults.
Raph, dude, I haven't talked about that college in a long time. I have so many stories that I can just talk about. Like,
this is fair.
The traditional, like the traditional Chinese medicine aspect of it in and of itself. It's wild, man. It's wild. Like the entire, let me just drop this on you really quick. The entire idea behind chi and the flow of energies between everybody and everything like that. And it's like the reason people kind of believe it, and at least people think there's something to it, is because those lines of energies match systems within our bodies. They're the core lines of chi in traditional Chinese medicine, at least, because there's different kinds of chi. Even, I think Japan has like versions of it which they took from China and adapted. India has versions of that which I think they also took from China and adapted. But like there are lines that like match our vascular system, lines that match our nervous system, lines that match our lymph system. So people are like, oh wow, these people really knew what they were talking about. So these things kind of line up. Literally made up. They were made up by people who at some point were given like a prompt, I guess, like, like some emperor somewhere was just like, hey, make me immortal. I can't verify the truth of this story. But like, I personally believe this is the way it goes. How most of these things go. It's like some person with a lot of power says, make me immortal. And they throw money at like what would the equivalent of like their medical budget would be, right? Like find a way to make me immortal. So then you have all these scientists all these people who would be considered scientists at the time, figuring out how to make the body work, right? So they kind of like move stuff around in the body. They realize, oh, these are some core aspects of the human body: the vascular system, the nervous system, the lymph node system, and they kind of plot it out with the intention of trying to fix something that wasn't really broken.
Right. Yeah. Or with like,
which is
a pie in the sky objective that cannot be completed.
A moonshot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the reason I like this theory the most is because when somebody with that amount of power says, give me an answer, it doesn't matter if your answer is right or whether you think your answer is right. You give them an answer and then see what happens, right? So like what has to happen? Like, and this is just how we see, this is how a lot of this happens in modern science as well. You will get a big company, like you say, Big Sugar, will say, hey, give me reasons why cereal is the most important meal of the day. And then guess what? Studies will be published about why cereal is the most, why cereal is the most important meal of the day, backed up by science.
Also, I love that cereal in the meal, like not breakfast, just cereal.
No, cereal. Well, it's Big Sugar, right? It's like, but that's where the idea of, like that literally happens, right? The idea when we say like breakfast is the most important meal of the day, it's because literally Big Sugar, people who ran all the big cereal companies, hired scientists to do all these studies and then published the data that made them look good, and they ignored the rest of the data. And that's basically what happened. And that's what happens throughout thousands and thousands of years. Somebody came around and said, hey, give me some studies about why I'm the best, or give me some studies about like how do I cure this thing? How do I make my lineage live longer? All these things happen. And eventually that kind of distills into this practice of holistic health before we get to modern medicine. Once we get to modern medicine, everything changes.
And if that theory is, I guess, true, I guess it would make sense, because it's not just that it distills down, it's that it's the only thing that survives, because you're talking about the only class of people who have the resources to put this to ink and preserve it, right? Like
that's also true. Yeah. Nobody else was writing anything because nobody else could write.
Yeah. So it's just like, this was literally all that survived because, someone was on a power trip and had the means to make it survive.
Yeah, like there may have been other better methods in place at the time, and it just didn't survive the history. It didn't survive the sands of time. It just was passed down by oral tradition and then gone. Totally happens. Like there are things that there are holes in history that we know exist, and we don't know what goes in it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, okay, now we're getting into a deeper conversation about the nature of how we get our information and how our worldview is shaped by these trains of thoughts. But I guess, are there any closing thoughts you want to say about this? On the cult college? Because I know you didn't even get to all your bullet points here that we had planned out. But
dude, so here's the thing. Cults will sneak up on you.
Gotta watch out. Protect your neck.
You gotta watch out. Protect your neck. Genuinely. Do some research on cults and kind of look out for, there are people have put out red flags, right? People have put out like some red flags to look out for it's like if you are going to walk face first into a cult, because you may not know what it is you're getting into until either it's too late or you've accidentally done some harm to somebody somewhere down the line. Because if you get into this, like with someone like me, if I didn't know any better, and I went to somebody who was more vulnerable, and I said, holistic health, that's the way to go, they might say, you're right, let me do some research on holistic health. And then they get into the rabbit hole of anti-vaxxing, and they get into the rabbit hole of, and they get into the rabbit hole of homeopathy. I could do some serious harm. You look for the red flags of things that, of well-known red flags of what makes a thing a cult. Kind of like, watch out for that, because pretty much anything can be turned into a cult at some point.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got to say. Because I fell into a cult. It happens to anybody.
Well, on that PSA note, that sounds like a good place to park it. So this has been an interesting conversation.
I mostly just wanted to talk. I just wanted to rant about that, because there's some weird stuff that happened, man.
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting part of of your history that I feel like we don't get to talk about too much. But
I could literally talk for hours about this 1 year in my life.
Well, thank you all very much for listening. This has been the Hypercube podcast. This show is edited by Loryn Pacheco, mixed by Raphael Pacheco, with original theme music by Mono Memory. Until next time, we'll see y'all later. God bless.
Namaste.